Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. The woman, question mark, at NYU Law, who now somewhat famously lost her job offer at Winston & Strawn because of the pro-Hamas statements that she issued. New York University Law Student Body President Rhino Workman sent a newsletter to classmates expressing unwavering and absolute solidarity with Palestinians and their resistance against oppression toward oppression toward liberation and self-determination. The blame, she wrote, for the tremendous loss of life is Israel's apartheid regime. So Winston & Strawn, under public pressure from some of these big bucks dudes saying, I'm going to take the names and tell all my friends not to hire these people. Winston & Strawn rescinded their offer. She told The Intercept that she's maintaining a resolve. By the way, I'm saying she. The Intercept refers to her as they. That's important. Much like we talked about that climate activist associate professor at the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, who is trans and called Israelis human excrement. The he pretending to be a she at the Art Institute. We have a they at New York University Law School. That's important, the politics of it. Anyway, Workman told The Intercept, what's been driving me is the resilience of the Palestinians in this moment, the fact they're still using their voice, they're still standing strong, they're still here, they're asking us to continue to speak out and show up for them. And I will continue to speak out for them and ask for these demands of an immediate ceasefire and this provision of the humanitarian assistance and so on and so forth. She is not at all dissuaded from her ill-informed agitprop because she lost the position at Winston & Strawn. Something else to take notice of for people that are rallying around Bill Ackman or Ken Griffin because they're saying, yeah, we're not going to hire these individuals and we're going to tell our friends not to. Like that's going to usher in some paradigm shift in the academy. I would argue it's not. And by the way, the criticism of university presidents like Michael Schill, the Dickensian name Michael Schill at Northwestern, really is not coming from a quarter that matters to them. Dan Proft or other conservatives are saying Michael Schill is a fork-tongued coward. Big deal. What does that mean to him? Nothing. As long as the professor stands by him, as long as more or less the board stands by him or stands quietly, which a lot of them do. And interesting, I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a congregant to a synagogue, big synagogue on the North Shore. And he was telling me about his rabbi, who is a well-known rabbi, and how upset his rabbi was at Michael Schill's equivocation on the Hamas terrorist attack. And, I mean, he had choice words for Michael Schill, even though this has been an otherwise, pro-Northwestern University person. And I said to my friend, well, okay, Wilson, when's the rabbi going to say something publicly? Well, there's the politics of it. No, I don't know. Tell me. Tell me how in this moment, when you see institutional leaders that you otherwise support retreating from the moral position on the issue, that you don't say something, particularly as a faith leader. No, I don't accept that. Just as I don't accept the contrived, cynically timed pullback of big bucks donors to Ivy League schools after having completed their 5-year pledge, as that Penn guy that we mentioned earlier in the show, or after giving $500 million to Harvard, as Ken Griffin has. Sorry, not impressed. Your private condemnation does not impress me. For more perspective on the academy, including our shared alma mater, Northwestern University, pleased to be joined by Guy Benson, who, of course, is the host of Fox News Radio's The Guy Benson Show. And he is also townhall.com's political editor. Guy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be back. Thanks.
So, what's your perspective on our shared alma mater?
Well, it's a place that I really love. I bleed purple. I really valued going there. Had a great time there, and it is so sad and upsetting to see what's happening. And look, it's always been a lefty place. It was a lefty place when I was there. It's a lefty place when you were there. It was not a radical place when we were there, and it has been basically captured by the radicals. The previous president, to get in the weeds a little bit, Morty Shapiro,
Mm-hmm.
a lefty himself, of course, but he was an adult, and he would stand up to these lunatics when it mattered, and they knew that. And he retired, and they brought in this guy, Schill, who was not their first choice. I think he was their third choice for various reasons. And he has just been terrible. I mean, I don't know the guy. I met him briefly once. I don't hate the man, but he's not a leader. He's butchered a number of big decisions, starting with the football coach situation and now something much more significant. And, I mean, the fact that they basically stood silent. This is a school that comments on everything. I mean, I don't know if you're on their email list, Dan, still, but they comment
I think
on
they've blocked me.
everything.
Yeah.
That's possible. Yeah, they're like, oh, let's delete his info. But when this happens, when that happens, something in the world, something in the country, something that generally the left wing is fired up about, out comes a university statement about it. Hitting all the buzzwords. And then on this one, very conspicuously, there was just nothing for days, and people started to notice, and people were sending me notes saying, "Hey, have you seen anything? What's going on here?" Then I was able to break the story because someone sent me an email, a private email screenshot of the president's office telling a group of alumni that the institution was not planning to make a statement on this. So I put that out there on Twitter. It really went viral. So the next day they ended up putting out a public statement saying that they weren't going to make an institutional statement. And he tried to sort of separate his own values personally from that of the school and saying, we don't want to trample on anyone else's speech rights by putting our thumb on the scale. I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
That would be inappropriate, except they do that every time for everything else. And they
Well,
never care about, offending conservative views on anything ever, except all of a sudden this one they have to be scrupulously neutral. And he said, so now, I just don't think we should be commenting on these types of things in general. Then that didn't go over well, so he had to do a follow-up statement clarifying that they're not in favor of Hamas slaughtering Jews. I mean, it's been a mess.
Yeah, but
Well,
oh.
also too, just well, 2 points on that. One is, Michael Schill does the identity politics response. As a citizen, as a Jew, these are my views, but I can't speak for the institution. So that's
Right.
that's rank pandering. Number one. Number two, he doesn't understand how free speech works, which is sort of a problem if you're a university president. He can speak, and I can speak, and you can speak, and we can all speak at the same time. That's how it works. So it's really beneath I don't know, the position to be that intellectually dishonest and that much of a rank panderer in an identitarian way.
On that point, just one other thing here, which I think is important. Since he has become the president of the university has made institutional comment on, for example, the Supreme Court striking down racial discrimination in college admissions. He expressed his disappointment with the court and condemned the decision.
Right.
They also, Northwestern did put out their statement in favor of Ukraine and standing with Ukraine against Russia. Now, I happen to agree with that statement. I disagree with the Supreme Court one, but he had no compunction on any of this stuff, and the school hasn't for years. Now, all of a sudden, you have the worst killing spree of Jews since the Holocaust in a single day, and suddenly the wildcat's got his tongue. I don't get it.
Well, what about the Asian American Studies program and their faculty members? They're not being quiet on this at all.
No. So because the university is not leading, you now have these sort of ad hoc statements going out from different departments and different deans. Some of them have been good. Some of them have been bad. And then some of them have been disgraceful, which is the one that you just mentioned. Asian American Studies. Apparently, the entire faculty of that department put out this statement, which was sent to me. So, by the way, I'm now getting like tips on a daily basis from Northwestern undergrads. I mean, I've been out of that place for a long time, but they're finding me because, for all the talk of how students are going to feel unsafe because of words, which has been this progressive anti-speech tactic they've been using for years, there are Jewish students across this country who absolutely actually feel unsafe because of the things being said by their classmates about the deaths of Jews. And I actually understand this is maybe the first instance where a large group of people across the country is actually justified in saying this might not be a safe environment for us, given what we're seeing. So this was one of the many tips that I got. It's the statement from these professors. This is faculty. This is not some stupid 19-year-old who's, hates mom and dad and has been taught to hate the country. These are the people teaching the stupid 19-year-olds.
Right.
And among other things, they took offense. The faculty of this department at Northwestern took offense on behalf of Hamas that people were comparing Hamas to ISIS. And they said it's Islamophobic to attack Hamas that way, which is just an insane thing. I mean, just overtly defending the honor of Hamas in that statement. And they called Hamas a political group. They framed them not as a terrorist organization, but as a political group. And then they did all the normal, genuflecting about the Palestinian plight and Islamophobia, all the stuff. And then they threw in half a sentence at the very end about, and by the way, we're not anti-Semitic. We don't like that either, which is not terribly convincing. It was a pro-Hamas defense from a faculty group at Northwestern. And again, I just wonder if you're a Jewish student, how do you feel sitting in one of those classes? I heard from one of them saying, look, when there were some hate crimes against Asian people, and we had the big hashtag Stop Asian Hate, we had rallies about that. I was fully on board for that. And here's professors from this group of the school on, the identity group we were rallying behind against hate against them. And they're cheering on, basically, or justifying not just hatred, but mass murder of my people. Where's the reciprocity? And there isn't reciprocity. And I think some eyes are being opened right now in a way that is, I'm sure, frightening and disturbing as it should be.
If only people would read Shelby Steele. Shelby Steele had this op-ed on Black Lives Matter a couple years ago in which he again described this post-civil rights era bargain between the races, black and white. And it's applicable now to all of the quote-unquote marginalized populations that have this suicide pact. This is about power politics. This is ideological. He wrote of the white-black dynamic. Both whites and blacks on the left need blacks to be victims. Whites need blacks they can save to prove their innocence of racism. Blacks must put themselves forward as victims, the better to make their case for continued entitlements. This is a corruption because it makes black suffering into a moral power to be wielded rather than a condition to be overcome. And that's what you have, and this is why I was referencing the trans thing with the NU Law School student and the School at the Art Institute professor. It's the same deal. You run my identitarian scam with me, and I'll run yours.
But apparently there's an exception for perhaps the most historically marginalized group on Earth, because there's enough people out there who hate them, and because on the grievance totem pole they've been demoted several rungs for reasons that I think go back to quite a lot of bigotry and also just anti-Western stuff and a whole series of, I would say, very ridiculous and morally bankrupt calculations. That is an exception now where I hope, and I'm not trying to speak on behalf of American Jews, I'm not Jewish, but I've heard from so many of my Jewish friends and neighbors who are deeply alarmed, left, right, and center. I think the righties are kind of like, yeah, we see this, we've always seen this with clear eyes. I think some of the folks on the left who are aghast at what's happening, they were perhaps participants in sort of the bargain that Shelby Steele was just describing, and then they realized, it actually doesn't flow back this direction where we need it the most. And I hope that is a meaningful realization, because that needs to impact, behavior and future choices as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's, when people start to give you indications of where they're going, you should take judicial notice. I mean, I've mentioned this many times now, but the BDS movement, which was born and is about the only place that still thrives on college campuses, those were some of the first steps down this path. And every time there's been conflict in the Middle East between Israel and any of the Arab world, you see where your otherwise fellow travelers in the West, where they're going. You see where the center of gravity is in the party with Tlaib and Omar and others. I mean, if it's not obvious now, it never will be obvious.
And I think a lot of it goes back to this just absolutely and ethically bereft framework that they use on the left, which is oppressor versus oppressed.
Yeah, right.
So, I mean, some of this is just old school anti-Semitism. People hate Jews. That's very much at play here. You mentioned Rashida Tlaib. I think that's where she lands. But for some of these other sort of fuzzy-brained people who just want to be pristinely progressive on everything, and they want to make sure that they're doing all the intersectionality duties properly and making sure that all the victims are getting their sympathy and the other people are bad, the oppressor versus oppressed framework is, I think, a contributing factor here, an explanatory one for a lot of folks, because they see Israel and they see, okay, these people are successful for the most part. It's a wealthy country. It's a Western country. Yeah. They're allied with the United States. You know, they call them white, which is not actually accurate on numerous levels, but that's kind of like the quick heuristic thinking. And they're like, okay, on the other hand, you have these other people, and sure, they might be quote-unquote terrorists, is of course what America calls them. I'm not sure if that's true, but they're poorer for the most part. They are marginalized. They don't have their own state, and I don't really know why that is. That detail matters a lot, but many of these people are ignorant. And, you know, they look a certain way, and so they're the oppressed. Israel's the oppressor. So even if the oppressor has a bunch of its babies slaughtered by the oppressed, well, you know, you have to break a few eggs to get justice or whatever. That's the mentality that a lot of people have, and it is appalling. And it's, I think, incumbent on people who believe in actual human rights and civilization and that sort of thing to fight it aggressively, because the barbarians are fighting it like they believe it over there, right? They're murdering as many people as they can. And going all the way back to your use of the word apartheid, quoting some of these people at the beginning of the segment, Dan, a crucial reality to remember for all the talk of apartheid, because they use that a lot against Israel, 20% of the population in Israel is Arab. They vote, they have political parties, they serve in government, they serve in the military, they have rights. They are members of that society. They live peacefully, overwhelmingly side by side with Jewish people. That's the so-called apartheid state of Israel. The only Jews, by contrast, the only Jews in Gaza are being held at gunpoint as hostages. And these people call Israel apartheid. It's absolutely backwards, totally disgustingly backwards.
Do you think there's any hope they'll be released unharmed?
Oh God, I hope so. I really hope so. I mean, my hopes are dim just because look at who we're dealing with, and I find it very telling that these imbeciles calling for a ceasefire, right? To basically say Israel, they've called for a ceasefire from the very beginning. Oh, Israel, don't defend yourself, don't do this anymore, take it lying down. Sorry, Jews, you can't fight back. You would think if they actually believed in the ceasefire and trying to get to some meaningful de-escalation, they would be rallying in the streets against Hamas, demanding a release of the hostages that are still alive. But oddly, guys, that doesn't seem to be their focus, does it?
No, but one of the other things here, too, that I can't emphasize enough because not enough people do, that the white guilt that Shelby Steele wrote about, the Jewish guilt that's an analog, that enables fascism, including Islamofascism, which you're seeing from Hamas and Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations. I hope more scales fall from more eyes as well.
Yep.
Guy Benson, host of Fox News Radio's The Guy Benson Show, and he's also townhall.com's political editor. Guy, thank you as always.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
It's what Chicago is talking about. It's Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy on AM 560. The Answer.
Attention taxpayers. If you or your business owe the IRS back taxes or have years of unfiled tax returns, the IRS has green-lighted billions of dollars in tax relief to those